Episode 3, The Expert in the Room, a short story about a leader who couldn't say 3 words in the week that followed. Leadership isn't learned in classrooms. It's learned in the moments you almost got it wrong and chose differently. Welcome to Leadership in Action, short stories, real situations, and the shifts that change everything.
There are moments in your career that you replay, not the big wins, not the promotions or the deals closed or the presentations that landed perfectly. Those fade faster than you'd expect. The ones that stay are the other kind. The ones where you see yourself clearly, maybe for the first time, and you don't entirely like what you find. This is one of those. My name is Richard, senior partner at a management consulting firm, 23 years in. I had built my reputation on one thing above almost everything else. I knew my material. Whatever the engagement, whatever the client, I walked into every room prepared. Thorough. On top of it, I was the one people called when a situation got complicated, when a client was difficult, when someone needed to stand at the front of a room and hold it together under pressure. That identity, the expert, the one who knows, had served me well for over 2 decades. And then, on a wet Wednesday afternoon in a glass-walled meeting room on the 14th floor of a client's office, it nearly cost me everything. We were 8 weeks into a major transformation program for a global manufacturing client. A significant piece of work. Process redesign, technology implementation, operating model changes across 4 business units. 12 people on our team. High visibility. High pressure. The town hall was scheduled for the following Wednesday. A full leadership presentation to around 180 of the client's senior managers. Results to date, recommendations going forward, the case for the next phase of investment. The kind of meeting where everything either consolidates or unravels. The dry run was designed to stress test the narrative before we went live. Standard practice. Our team, the client's project sponsor, and 3 of their senior directors in the room. Give the presentation, get the hard questions, sharpen the edges. I had run dozens of these. I was not nervous. I should have been. The first 40 minutes went well. Clean structure, strong data. My team had done excellent work, and it showed. I could feel the energy in the room settling into something positive. The particular quality of attention that tells you people are genuinely engaged, not just politely present. And then David, the client's chief operating officer, sharp, direct, not a man who asked questions for the sake of it, leaned forward slightly and said, "Richard, the productivity figures in Unit 3. They're showing a 17% improvement. I want to understand the methodology behind that number before we put it in front of 180 managers next week." Reasonable question. Exactly the kind of thing a dry run is for. And I didn't know the answer. Not the full answer. I knew the headline. I knew it was robust. But the specific methodology, the precise way the baseline had been calculated, the assumptions underneath it, that lived with 2 members of my team who had spent 3 weeks buried in the operational data. In the room were those 2 people, sitting at the table, 8 feet away from me. All I had to do was turn to them. But I didn't turn to them. What I said, and I remember it with uncomfortable precision, was, "That's a fair challenge, David. Frankly, I'd expect the team to have that documentation cleaner at this stage. We'll make sure it's airtight before next Wednesday." I moved on, smoothly, professionally. The presentation continued. But something had happened in that room that had nothing to do with the slides. I had taken a question I couldn't answer and, in the space of 2 seconds, converted it into a failure of the team. Not overtly, not cruelly, but clearly enough that everyone present understood what had just occurred. I had protected my expert identity by making someone else the problem. I noticed it in the debrief. My team was quiet in a way they hadn't been before the session. Nadia, who had built the Unit 3 model, who had spent the better part of 3 weeks in spreadsheets and factory floor data to produce that number, was looking at the table. She said nothing during the debrief. Nothing. Kieran, who had led the fieldwork in Unit 3, gave one-word answers to my questions and stopped making eye contact somewhere around the second question. I wrapped up the session, told everyone good work, key refinements needed, let's regroup in the morning. And then I sat alone in the meeting room for a few minutes after they left. The question David had asked was not a hard one. It was not a gotcha. It was a reasonable, senior-level challenge to a number we were about to put in front of 180 people. And the answer was sitting in my own team, at my own table, and I had not asked for it. Because asking for it would have meant saying, in front of the client, I don't know. But let me bring in the people who do. And that sentence, apparently, was one I didn't know how to say. I want to be honest about what drove that moment. Because it wasn't stupidity. And it wasn't malice toward my team. It was fear. Not the loud, obvious kind. The quiet, status-protecting kind. The fear of the crack in the image. The fear that one moment of not knowing would undo 23 years of being the person who does know. That David would see it and recalibrate, and the ground would shift under the whole engagement. So I papered over the crack, instantly and instinctively. And in doing so, I transferred the fracture to somewhere else, to the people sitting at the table who had done nothing wrong and who walked out of that room carrying something they hadn't walked in with. I had 7 days until the town hall, and I had a team that no longer trusted me the way they had that morning. I didn't sleep well that night. By 6 the next morning, I was at my desk. I sat with the discomfort of the previous day for a while, properly sat with it, rather than reframing it into something more comfortable. And what I kept coming back to was Nadia, looking at the table. She had built that model. She knew it better than anyone in that room, including me. And instead of turning to her, instead of saying, David, great question, let me bring in Nadia who owns this analysis, I had implied, in front of the client, that her work wasn't ready. She hadn't done anything wrong. The model was good. I just hadn't known enough about it to defend it. At 8:30, I sent her a message, asked if she had 15 minutes before the team stand-up. She said yes. When she joined the call, I didn't open with an agenda or a task. I said, I want to apologize. Yesterday in the dry run, when David asked about the Unit 3 methodology, I deflected in a way that was unfair to you. The work is solid. I just didn't know it well enough in the moment to say so, and instead of being honest about that, I made it sound like a team problem. That wasn't right. Silence on her end. Then she said, quietly, thank you for saying that. I asked her to walk me through the methodology, the full picture, baseline calculation, assumptions, sensitivity analysis, everything. And she did. It took 35 minutes. By the end of it, I understood the model the way I should have understood it going into the dry run. It was, as I had suspected, solid. More than solid. It was some of the most rigorous analytical work I'd seen produced under that kind of time pressure. Nadia, I said, before we ended the meeting, next Wednesday, I want you to present this section. She was quiet for a moment. In the town hall? Yes. You built it. You should own it in the room. That decision changed something, not just for Nadia, for the whole team. I called a session that afternoon, all 12 of them, and I did something I had never done in 23 years of client work. I told them what had happened in my own head during the dry run. Not in a confessional, self-indulgent way, but plainly. I said I had been asked a question I couldn't fully answer, that I had deflected instead of doing what I should have done, which was to turn to the people in the room who could. I told them that wasn't the standard I wanted to hold, and it wasn't the team I wanted to be. And then I said, this town hall belongs to all of us. I want to restructure the last third of the presentation so that the people who own the work are the ones presenting it. Not me standing in front of it, but each of you, with me alongside. The room shifted. I could feel it. The particular quality of people sitting up slightly, re-engaging with something they had perhaps begun to disengage from. Kieran spoke first. I think that's going to land better with the client anyway, he said. Their managers will respond to seeing the detail held by the people who actually did the work. He was right, and he knew that I knew he was right. The town hall was 7 days later. I opened it, set the context, the stakes, the strategic framing, and then, for the sections that mattered most, the sections built on months of hard analytical and operational work, I stepped back. Nadia presented Unit 3. She fielded 3 technical questions from the floor with a precision and confidence that I watched the client's senior directors respond to visibly. David, the COO, nodded slowly during her methodology explanation and wrote something in his notebook. Kieran presented the operating model redesign. He knew every assumption, every trade-off, every objection before it was raised. I came back in for the close, the investment case, the next phase, the ask. We got the mandate. Full scope, full budget, no conditions. Afterwards, in the elevator on the way out, David said to me, "Strong team, Richard. You can tell they own it." I said, "Yes, indeed, they really do." I've thought a lot about what I nearly let happen that Wednesday in the dry run. Not just the deflection itself, but the whole architecture of thinking underneath it. The belief, somewhere deep and unexamined, that my value in the room depended on being the one with the answers. That admitting a gap, even a small one, even momentarily, would cost me something I couldn't afford to lose. What I've come to understand is that the opposite is true. The most credible thing I could have done in that moment, for the client, for my team, for myself, was to say, "Great question. I want to bring in Nadia, who built this model and knows the ins and outs, to walk you through the methodology." That sentence would have shown David exactly what kind of leader I am. It would have shown my team that their expertise is visible and valued. It would have made the whole room stronger. Instead, I protected an image, and it nearly broke something real. The image of the expert who always knows is not leadership, it's theatre. Real leadership is knowing what you know, knowing what you don't, and being secure enough in yourself that the difference between those two things doesn't feel like a threat. That security, I've learned, is not something you're born with. It's something you choose, usually in the moment. When choosing, it costs you something.
If you're the expert in the room, ask yourself whose expertise you might be standing in front of, and whether the room would be stronger if you stepped aside. Every story in this series begins with a leader who thought they had it figured out, because that's usually where the real learning starts. In the next episode, we follow an external consultant brought in to drive performance, who is moving so fast and pushing so hard that he stops seeing the people in front of him. It's a story about what happens when results become the only thing that matters, and the quiet damage that does to a team that was there long before you arrived. If you've ever walked into an organization and assumed that speed was the same thing as progress, that one's for you. Until then, think about the last time you protected your image instead of your people.